Hello and welcome to Module 7. This is in our textiles unit and we have so much to cover. So in this unit, we are looking specifically at textiles and leather and fur falls underneath that, and I thought it was a good grouping. So the first one we talk about in Module 7 is the leather industry. And so something to note is that leather and fur are the oldest, most sought after, and I think we can all agree, most glamorous of all of the textiles. Both leather and fur are animal skins. So you have one side of the skin is leather and the other side is fur. And the leather industry is one that's always expanding its markets. And you'll see in this full presentation some of those industry trends that we see with leather and fur. So leather is a really specialized, time-consuming product. Because leather is so specialized, we typically see the leather industry anticipating trends around 8 to 16 months in advance, just because it takes so long sometimes to tan it and get it to the end product that we need. The leather industry does suffer a little bit less criticism than fur because typically we hear this. It depends on the company, of course, but that it's a byproduct of the meatpacking industry. And so just a special little note, ostrich, the skin of it is worth 4 times the value of meat. So ostrich skin, the meat is actually the byproduct. So sometimes it's a co-product in places where export is high, but I do think that that's kind of a cool thing to point out. So make sure to dive into the history and development of the leather industry in the full presentation. There are some big categories of leather that you're probably familiar with, but then there's probably some other ones that maybe you're not as familiar with. And I've broken those down and given you some details in that full presentation about each of those areas of leather. And if you will click in the full presentation on these pictures, it's going to take you to the websites that those are from, and it'll tell you how much those are. So you'll be surprised when you find out that some of these things are like thousands of dollars. When it comes to leather processing, there's a few different ways that we see this happening. And we see the process called tanning, which is a Latin word for oak bark. But it's either through minerals, vegetable minerals, oils, and chemicals. And these can be used individually to tan things or in a combination. And so I've put a video in the slide. You don't have to watch the whole thing. It's a man that I've sat and watched the video. He is using all of these different materials to tan some of these materials that he has. So just if you want to go and watch that, you'll be tested over it, but it is kind of neat to see the process. So with leather processing, I wanted to point out, some of you have probably seen patent leather, and that's that turquoise purse up in the very top. Patent leather shoes are pretty popular. They're glossy and have a really high shine finish. Suede is also a type of leather that you might be familiar with. Those are probably like the two most likely. Of course, metallic, maybe you have a few items that are that as well, but just wanted to point out a few of those. You can read and see this chart on page 133 in your book. So just a few trends to round out leather. This is what you'll finish up with in that full presentation. The fur industry. So this one, again, sought after. We see fur being used for the purposes of warmth and used to keep people in frigid temperatures comfortable. Maybe not comfortable, I guess that's the wrong word, but taken care of in the cool weather. And then we also see the contrast of that fur being used for a glamorous social status type textile. And so I did put a little bit of the history about fur because maybe you're not as familiar with it, but we see I've covered the picture here in my video, but it is said, I have looked in a lot of places, and I'm just going to say it's said. We can't prove for sure that I have found, but that in the 1900s, the Chilean government backed a loan with chinchilla skins. And I actually got to pet a chinchilla at a museum a few years ago, and they are so, so soft. And so I thought that was kind of a cool thing to point out. Beaver fur we saw mostly used for men's hat. In Canada in 1733, one beaver pelt could buy a pound of sugar, 6 combs, 6 thimbles, and or 8 knives. And so it is said that John Jacob Astor, the Astor family is someone you might be familiar with from history classes, was one of the first millionaires in the beaver trade. So again, make sure that you really dive a little bit deeper into that full presentation with that history and development. A few fun pictures here. This Oscar de la Renta coat is $210,000. This is a link on the right-hand side here of a faux fur jacket, and it's becoming a lot more popular, and I've linked an ad in there or an article if you'd like to go and explore that. Something I feel like I need to point out when it comes to animal rights groups, PETA is going to be one, and I have included a disclaimer here, that we see a lot. Oftentimes there's controversy. And so personally, this is my opinion, my 2 cents. I think that we just need to form our own opinions based on our own research when it comes to these types of groups. I will share this information. It is included in your textbook. But I think form your own opinion. That's kind of where I'll leave that one. So animal rights groups, they protest that wearing fur is cruel and inhumane. Some are opposed to trapping fur-bearing animals in the wild. So there's different groups that focus on different points of this. PETA is one that has run fur campaigns. They've staged demonstrations at events. They've had complete advertisement campaigns about not wearing fur. And then you'll see those little logos down in the far left-hand corner. Those are PETA cruelty-free logos that they apply to certain products. And so other groups have raided fur farms and released the animals or destroyed like the pedigree documents for the animals. They've thrown paint on the fur if people were walking down the street or on the runway. The response for this is that fur farms do not remove animals from the wild, and that 95% of the fur used comes from humane trapping. Real fur does not use non-renewable petroleum-based products that have a large impact on the environment. So you see arguments from both sides. That's where you have to make your personal decisions based on the research that you do. Do you choose to support wearing fur, or do you prefer to wear faux, fake, manufactured, whichever word you're using for that fur? So real versus faux fur. These are 2 examples here. One's real and one's a fake fur. And so they have grown in popularity. We've seen the faux fur come a long way in how it looks and the texture. But I will say the weight of a real fur is significantly different than that of a faux fur. Again, kind of make your own opinions. I put some information about pelt productions. And so fur pelts are typically sold at auctions, much like they were in the 13th century. And we do have a Little Rock fur store. I've linked that in there if you're interested in clicking on that. There is something I need to mention. Fur farming does have those 2 advantages. The animals are raised under controlled conditions and they're bred selectively. So then we end up getting that prime, top quality fur. Because if you think about a cold weather animal, if it gets warm, they start shedding, and then their fur is not going to be at that peak optimal quality. But fur farming allows that to happen. Top bundle is what we call the most expensive fur. And so we look for bundles at fur auctions, the ones who go, not me, obviously, that are matched in quality and color. Because if we end up with 5 different bundles and none of them are matching, it's going to be really difficult to produce a cohesive fur jacket with those. And so something to kind of highlight here, I've linked in a few things about Fur Product Labeling Act. this has to include certain information, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention for this chapter. So quick rundown of leather and fur. Dive into this one. This one's maybe not something you're as familiar with, and I hope that you enjoy learning about this. If you have any questions or need anything, as always, please just reach out and let me know.